When it comes to fairness and equality with online assessments for recruitment, people have almost the polar opposite opinion of what the real situation is. It's a very bizarre situation. Now, organizations are indeed correct to be concerned about these issues. It is obviously a really important issue that your selection processes are fair and valid and do not adversely impact legally protected groups. Obviously, that is a proper concern and it's something that should be addressed. The problem is that they, as a general rule, completely miss the real situation and are just scared of change. That is basically what it boils down to. They don't want to change anything in fear that it may make things worse. They have no real reason to believe that it would, and they have no real reason to believe that their existing processes are currently fair. Now that's important because one of the real benefits of assessments are that they are an objective option that will dilute the negative impact of existing hiring practices on fairness. Okay? Because the most discriminatory assessments that we know of are CV sifting and interviews. They're awful. I mean, CV sifting, there is a huge literature now, decades of research looking at how it impacts women, people from ethnic minority groups. Anything that you can pick up, any variable that comes through on a resume, on a CV, is going to put those people at disadvantage. And there's no amount of implicit bias training or unconscious bias training that gets rid of this. The evidence does not suggest those things work. In fact, there's good evidence it makes things worse. It just brings the unconscious bias more conscious, and that's more effective at discrimination. And so anything that can help you move away from CV sifting is going to be advantageous from a fairness and adverse impact perspective. Interviews, again, like if you wanted to allow unconscious bias, it's hard to imagine a tool more vulnerable than an interview, because you're just relying on the opinions of the assessor, of the interviewer. And they could just decide anyone from a particular ethnicity or gender just doesn't get a job. It's so easy to do. And there's no consistency either, because you will have different people with different opinions, different backgrounds, acting completely differently. The existing selection process from a traditional perspective is ideal for discrimination and bias. It is perfect. It's hard to imagine an assessment process more discriminatory that is so unrobust against these factors. Now, the benefit of candidates, online assessments, is they are neutral. You just press a button and invite 1,000 candidates, and the effect of the assessor is nil. It just doesn't make any difference. So you could have the most racist assessor imaginable. It doesn't impact the scores of the candidates. It doesn't matter. They just clicked a button and invited 1,000 people to do an assessment. So conscious and unconscious bias is largely negated from the assessor. Now, the other benefit is that, unlike with an interview, which happens over the course of an hour and then never happens again, it's standalone. With assessments, they are structured and standardized, and you can do research on them. You can see if there is adverse impact. You can analyze these data. And so you will know, and you can make adjustments as required. You can't do these things with an interview. It's just biased by default, and that's it. Whereas with an assessment, you can do the research, and you can change things, and you can remove bias and make sure everything is fair. You can hire consultancies exist to help undertake this kind of research and perform these kind of services. There's a lot more that can be done. You can detect problems before you even use the assessment in recruitment because you can do the research, because it's a product used multiple times. That should be all the reassurance organizations need fundamentally to highlight how much better this approach is than what they are currently doing. And by adding these things in and by tacitly taking away some of the reliance on these sort of older assessment methodologies like interviews and CV sifting, all you're doing is making the process more fair. You're just diversifying away from these outdated methods. And I don't recommend you stop doing interviews. They're still useful tools, but you have to relegate them a little bit because they are so inherently biased. Especially early on in the recruitment process. It's so easy to just disregard a CV, for example, without thinking this is a person. Very easy to do because those methods of assessment are just so vulnerable to the implicit biases of people. Whereas psychometric assessments, online tests, everyone gets the same thing. Everyone has the same challenge. It's fixed standard benchmark that does not need to take into account people's backgrounds. It's a level playing field in a way that interviews and CV sifting is not. So I strongly recommend reframing your thinking. Okay? And it's a matter of improving fairness, diversity, equality over time. That's the goal. And if you don't change anything, don't expect it to improve.